Dear learners, welcome back to another session of Research Methodology for Tourism and Hospitality Management. We have been discussing the sampling process, and in the last module, we have seen in detail about conducting of telephonic, Zoom call or Google Meet interviews, how to collect data through these methods. We also saw focus group discussions, and we ended with transcription process. And in today's module, we will see the quality criteria, which is discussed widely and debated widely. In the beginning of the research, I told you that qualitative methods are one emerging methods in the research area. Qualitative techniques are widely criticized in the early because of the validity issues, and there were a skewed thinking that quantitative researches would be more beneficial. In today's discussion, we will be going through the quality criteria for collecting data for qualitative researches. So this checklist for interviews and GDs is the first part which we will be covering, and the second segment will be dealing with evaluating the quality of qualitative research. I recommend a publication by Tony, Sainbury and Craig, which deals with COREQ, that means a checklist useful for conducting interviews and focus group discussion. Why we have to follow this checklist? Once again, we have to remember the validity of qualitative researches are widely debated. So, to maintain high quality and to maintain the standards, it is better to follow established procedures. This publication discusses in detail about this criteria. So, we have seen in-depth interview and focus group interviews, group discussions. These are the three forms of collecting qualitative data for the research, along with participant observation. So, how we should be prepared, or what are the parameters that we have to take into care, that we will be discussing in the coming slides. COREQ, that is Consolidated Criteria for Reporting Qualitative Studies. There is a 32 item checklist suggested by authors under three broad domains, and domain number 1, that is mainly dealing with the personal characteristics of the researcher. So, domain 1 explains research team and reflexivity, domain 2 speaks on study design, domain 3 analysis and findings. So, personal characteristics, do you think it matters? Yes, it is very important, because the researcher engages with the respondent and there is a possibility of bias, and here the biasness may impact your research outcome. So, do you think the interviewer or the facilitator, who conduct the interview and how the interview is conducted? What is the educational qualification of the person who conducted the interview? Imagine at times you are not conducting the interview. You may use a research assistant, or you may use the help of some people who are known to you. Are they able to capture the questions and the responses carefully? Then comes the question of occupation of the respondent as well as the occupation of the researcher or the enumerator. The gender. See, at times gender play a role. Imagine the data has to be collected from a different gender and the question asked by the researcher is of a different gender. So, there could be at times issues, and then whether the researcher able to establish a relationship with the target respondent, and whether the participant know the interviewer, then the characteristics of the interviewer, that means whether there are any presumptions or the interviewer is approaching the problem with any biasness or assumptions. So, the first part, the domain 1, which contains 8 attributes. These 8 attributes are the personal characteristics of the researcher. Once again, let me tell you how it is going to affect your research. You have to be careful when you are going for data collection. The first aspect of qualitative research is you have to keep yourself away. Your perspective should not be mixed with the data collection process. Then you have to take research as research itself. If imagine you are not collecting the data, the person who is going to collect the data should have the required educational qualifications. At times, educational qualifications do not match. Maybe they have more knowledge or expertise. If they have experience, then it is fine. Then the way the enumerator or the data collector established contact with the respondent, that matters. So, this 8 items speaks clearly how you have to be prepared while you are going with the qualitative data collection, whether that is interview or focus group interview, or even you can say about group discussions. The second aspect is study design. In the study design, that deals with mainly theoretical framework. The theoretical framework aspect, this contains 14 different attributes. That is how the researcher designs the methodology and how that theoretical aspects underpin the study. That means the particular study, how it is going to be useful and beneficial. We have seen different kind of methods, that is grounded theory, discourse analysis, ethnography, etc. So, the first aspect here is in the study design, theoretical framework matters. And the second aspect here is participant selection. Participant selection here means how you are going to select the sample and how the participant is approached by email or by telephone or face to face. Next one is the sample size, and what do you do if some participants refuse to participate? Are you noting down the reasons why they have not participated? The second aspect is related to participant selection. And the third aspect under study design is setting. In the setting of data collection matters. That is, if you are conducting an interview and there are some people around the respondent, if they influence the respondent, you may not get the required data. So, presence of non-participants have to be documented, and whether they influence your interview, that matters. Next comes the description of the sample. So, what are the characteristics of the sample? The demographic information. So, setting means the way you collect the data from the field and the presence of non-participants, as I said earlier. The fourth aspect is data collection. In data collection, whether you prepared an interview guide and are you keeping a particular note, if you want to do the interview again, or do you have field notes? The duration minimum required, minimum duration of the interview. Normally an interview, it can last up to 40 minutes or 1 hour. Then the data saturation, how you are going with data saturation. Next, transcripts. The transcripts returned by the participant after making comments or any corrections. So, a number of things comes under study design. So, dear learners, here the data collection process involves theoretical framework, participant selection, setting and data collection. Now, let us see the third domain. In the third domain, it is related to data analysis. In data analysis, normally when we do data analysis, we do coding process. So, who does the coding? And the coding is agreed by the co-researcher. Now, I am talking about a project. If you are part of a project, there would be co-researchers. And if you are a research student, then your supervisor will help you out. So, the way you do coding, is it as per norms? Then the emerging themes noting, how you report the themes, and the use of the software. Are you well versed with the software? Then when you present the report, how many quotations that you used, direct quoting of the respondent, and whether the data is consistent, and clarity of major themes. So, domain 3 that deals with analysis and findings. So, COREQ, this checklist present you the minimum requirements, consolidated criteria for reporting qualitative studies, short form COREQ. It helps the researcher to organize well before going for a data collection process. So, we have seen 3 different areas, that is number 1 related to the participant and researcher, and number 2 the theoretical framework and data collection, and the third aspect is the reporting of your result. So, if you create a checklist of these 32 items, which will ensure you some amount of reliability and validity. In the next segment, we will be dealing with the quality of qualitative research. In this, we will go through why qualitative researches are criticized. One is, we do not have comparable standards to check the quality of qualitative research. This is not correct. Why? By now, you have already seen COREQ. There are other standards also established which speaks about maintaining the standard of qualitative researches. The second issue is whether reliability and validity matters. How to address the issue of reliability and validity? We can see the manuscript. If the manuscript is addressing a central question, you can address the issue of reliability. Then, if your sampling strategy is appropriate, you have mentioned your sampling strategy in the report, and the way you have chosen the respondents, conducted the study, the resources that you used, and the places included in the context, then that also helps us to validate the study. One of the issue that we see is convenient sampling or purposive sampling is not appreciated well among the research circle. But in qualitative researches, we use commonly purposive sampling. One question to answer is sample size. Are we having sufficient sample size? How we can ensure the number of samples that you used in the study is sufficient? So, sample sufficiency is a question to be addressed upon. Then few more points to remember here is the choice of data analysis method. Here we find coding or writing memos, finding the latent themes. This is the standard procedure followed worldwide. So, this content analysis in the form of identifying themes, you have to use sufficient references in the text, and the presentation of the results, how you are going to present the result, because in qualitative research we use quotations. So, these quotations should be supported with the researches available, and the consistency factor should be maintained, that we call internal consistency. And finally, what extent your research uncover new perspective, new ideas generated through your research matters a lot. So, if you address all these points, you can address the question of ensuring quality. Now, I would like to point out a finding from a researcher named Vasilio, and this is published in Medical Science in 2018. It speaks on sample size, sufficiency of the sample size for interview based studies. So, according to the author is finding some common issues with the sample size. That means number one, purposive sampling is used. Number two, why purposive sampling is used? Because it results in good information by the respondent. And then the number of samples can be less or fewer persons are required if you get a good data, the usable data. And then after completing 20 interviews, many researchers stopped collecting new data because it says that the redundant information is coming. So if there is no new information is coming, then you can apply the principle of theoretical sampling. It is not a claim or a usable reference, but I am saying that according to Thorogood, found that 20 interviews were sufficient for extracting the information. So the term that we use here is saturation, data saturation. If the saturation happens, then you can stop the data collection work. I recommend you to read a book that is dealing with comparative method for theme saturation. This is authored by Constantinu Georgiou and it is published in the year 2017. It is published in Qualitative Research. Now, few important points to note. I hope what topic right now I am covering would be highly useful for all research scholars and the emerging researchers. This is called Big 8 10 criteria for excellent qualitative research. Sarah J. Tracy is quoted in many researches. What are these 8 criteria? One is a worthy topic. The topic should be relevant and it should be interesting and it should be evocating new perspectives. Your research topic matters. Then rigor. Rigor means how robust your work is. The theoretical construct that you used is again relevant. The data and the time that you spend in the field is substantial or the sample size sufficient. The context and data collection, analysis process all are standard or as practiced by researchers across the world. So the first 2 topics I hope you remember, worthy topic, and second one is the process that you follow should be rich. The third point I mentioned here is sincerity. This means self-reflexivity. That is, the subjective values of the researcher matters. Any biasness or inclination of the research matters. What extent your research is transparent. The methods that you used is communicated and the challenges that you faced. This is presented in point 3, that is sincerity. Now comes the question of credibility. Whether your description is thick and rich, concrete details are provided, explicit information is given, that means knowledge generating, non-contextual, and whether your information is describing rather than just telling, whether the inputs that you get is properly crystallized to form appropriate meaning, then the reflection of members. There is no established threshold limits or values to check the credibility of a qualitative research. I hope when you work you will realize this, because when you present the information, you can give the narrative of the respondent. How you reflect yourself upon this, that matters here under the term credibility. Next aspect is resonance. So the aspect here is how you present the information. Is it having a flow? Continuity is there or not? Whether the representation generate a thought-provoking or making new ideas, developing new perspective in the readers. Generalization, how naturalistic it is. Are these findings transferable? The 6th point here is the contribution of your research. That contribution in the sense, one is theoretically, second practically, morally, methodologically and heuristically. So when we talk about a research, the researcher spend considerable time in the field. The considerable time of your youth you spend for your research. Ultimately, when you submit the thesis, even it is a dissertation, in a printed form, it gives you some sense of satisfaction. So it should also give some implementation aspect. That means practically how it is useful, or academically how it is going to contribute. The seventh point I would like to put here is ethics. What ethical practices you maintained while you completed your research, and the institution specific or individual specific, both matters. As a individual, what kind of ethical standards you maintain, and in the second case, institution, they may have certain policies. So have you followed up that institutional policies? The last point here is coherence. So how your research is making a meaning that connect the theory, that connect the literature, and that connect the research questions and findings. So these 8 points are said to be the big 8 tenets which deals with the qualitative research quality standards. This big 8 10 criteria to ensure quality of qualitative researches speaks a lot about maintaining the standards of qualitative research. When you start writing, you will realize all this. When you frame a sentence, you know the difficulty and where to connect it with the theory, how to use in-text citations, how to proceed with each phase of your research, from theoretical foundations, data collection, analysis, and discussions. So how much your perspectives come into play, that matters. Means as a researcher, I have my own perspective. When I collect the information and present it, what extent that is influenced in this process, and the established procedures worldwide. Being a researcher, am I aware of this? So all this comes into context. These 8 different subtitles checks the quality of the research work under different criteria. I hope you got an insight on this. You may go through the research article for more information. And for young learners who are in graduate or postgraduate level, make sure that what you study matters a lot. How do you present the information that is going to be useful for next generation? Your dissertation will be kept in your library. So somebody checks the dissertation, they know that you have done this work. So whatever your reflections are there in that dissertation. Let us conclude here. We started with discussing widely practiced methods for qualitative data collection, and from here we moved into maintaining the standards and quality of qualitative researches. At first, we have seen 32 item checklist known as COREQ, and at the second phase, we have seen the 8 big tenets, that is different criteria followed to ensure the quality of qualitative research. When you go through your dissertation work, check at each phase what we discussed today. So it should maintain authentic information, it should be reflective, and it should maintain the standards as described by the previous researchers. I hope you got a good understanding about the topics discussed today. If you have any doubts, please come back to me. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.